This final part of the OSHA Ergonomics lecture, this final segment, looks at some state plans. We know that federal OSHA does not have an ergonomic standard, that it was repealed back when President Bush the son took office. But do you need to be aware of state ergonomic standards? There were several states, Washington State, Michigan, that had a standard. North Carolina, they had an ergonomic standard at one point. They ended up repealing it. There were some states such as Oregon and Michigan that looked at adopting an ergonomic standard, but decided not to at that point in time. And so we're left with only one single state, and you probably recognize from the slide, the state of California is the only state that currently has a state ergonomics OSHA standard. It was implemented in 1997. And it's actually doesn't say it's an MSD standard, ergonomic standard. It is a standard that focuses on RMIs, or repetitive motion injuries. RMIs, California decided to call these types of injuries RMIs before federal OSHA decided on MSD terminology, and so they have an RMI standard. The standard went into effect 1997. It was court ordered. California OSHA was taken to court, and it was mandated that they had to develop, had to implement, had to promulgate an RMI standard. The standard is, I've copied it. It is a very short, very brief, I guess short and sweet standard. It's on page 102 in your workbook. And so if you'll turn to page 102. This one-page standard, it basically says that not every company in California has to address ergonomics. Basically, you only have to address it. You only have to implement what's stated in the standard if you have problems. And so Part A lays out the scope of the standard. Who does it apply to out in California? And so I've underlined kind of the important points. Basically, scope and application says it applies to a job process or operation where a repetitive motion injury has occurred to more than one employee. And so you don't have to implement this, do anything about this standard until you've got more than one employee that has problems. These problems need to be work-related. So point 1 says it has to be work-related, that it's predominantly, so mostly 50% or more, caused by work in a repetitive process, job, or operation. The 2 or more employees you have to be doing identical work activities using the same repetitive motion task, and so they have to be in the same, essentially the same task. Third, it has to be diagnosed by a licensed physician, and it's an objective diagnosis, not just symptom, but objective diagnosis. And then lastly, the fourth requirement, it has to be reported in the last 12 months after the standard went into effect, and so 1997. So any reports of injuries that meets this scope, then you would have to implement a program described in Part B of the standard. Part B, the program looks like 1, 2, 3, worksite evaluation, control, and training. And the last part, Part C, says basically you've satisfied your obligations if you've done B, and there's nothing out there that's more effective. And so basically you have to keep monitoring for this effectiveness part. Okay, because I want you to take a look at and implement this standard a little bit more, I've put a couple cases, so kind of a case study on page 103, dealing with Betty and a coworker. And so if you'll read through the standard on page 102, answer the questions on 103, we'll take a quick look at it in class at some point when I return, and we'll and it's one of those things you might see on the final exam. And so take a few minutes to read through the standard, answer the case questions on page 103, and we'll assume that you're good for the OSHA ergonomics portion.